I'm Greg DePalma, and thanks for tuning in to another season of NASCAR coverage on the Prime Sports Radio Network. As the NASCAR season returns this weekend from Daytona Speedway with the Daytona 500. I'll be joined shortly by race analysts Kenny Bruce and CJ Radoon to preview the season, including the 500, with key team changes, driver analysis, championship and race odds, and much more, including our top 4 Prime Sports races of the year. That's Prime Sports NASCAR, brought to you by RaceReviewOnline.com and KennyBruce.net on Prime Sports Network, starts now. All right, so we are just, 3 days away from the Daytona 500. The duels are tonight. The Clash was on Sunday, so Speed Week, we're right in the smack dab in the middle of Speed Week, and the season is going to get underway in just a few days, and that's why this is the perfect time for us to let you know all about the changes from last year to this year, as well as what to expect with the championship odds, of course, the 500, and much more. By the way, Eric Smith from RaceReviewOnline.com will be with me on Sunday. He's going to be reporting live from the 500, so I'll go over some of the topics that we'll discuss on today's show with Eric, including, of course, an update following all the additional practice sessions and the duels with Eric on race day. So stay tuned for that. That should be a lot of fun. But let's welcome in my co-hosts and top NASCAR analysts here on Prime Sports Network to the show. I'll start in order of the length of how long they've been on this show or on this network. We'll start with Kenny Bruce, from formerly editor at NASCAR.com and new owner of the brand new website, KennyBruce.net. Kenny, I'm excited for you and your new ventures. Thanks for coming back for another season with us.
Well, I appreciate it, Greg. Thanks for having me back on there. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, you're right. It's a new venture, and hopefully it'll take off, and I can provide race fans with something different that they're looking for that's not currently out there.
All right. Well, specifically, based on, of course, your background, what would be considered different? I know a lot of different websites nowadays. I mean, of course, you know me. It's all about fantasy and handicapping.
Right.
Eric's got his thing. CJ has his thing. But what about you? What is it exactly that you think that is going to be different on your site when fans go there?
Yeah, well, mine, it's not, obviously I won't be able to ignore, the news of the day, but I won't focus on that so much as, who may be somebody that won the race or won the pole or something like that, depending on the day when it occurs. But, if there are any stories behind that, or stories that maybe, that don't get told, or, historical perspectives, coming down to Daytona, I've done a couple of pieces, I did one on the history of the Clash, looking back at it. I've got one that'll probably go up this weekend, going through some stuff the other day, and I didn't realize, and I don't think anybody from NASCAR could tell you if you asked them when, for instance, the use of a rookie stripe on cars actually began. It just kind of appeared. Well, I was looking through some stuff the other day, and I came across reports from the 1961 Daytona 500.
Wow.
And there was mention of there had been numerous crashes in the qualifying races leading up to that year's Daytona 500, and some of the drivers were concerned and voiced those concerns to NASCAR, and NASCAR required rookies to paint their rear bumpers a fluorescent red. And, I don't know that continued on after the 500, but that was the first instance I could find of what we would think of as a rookie stripe today. So I've been working on that piece, and it'll go up later this week. Just different things like that.
Sure.
Things that you wouldn't normally see, and in your daily coverage.
You knew the answer to that, right, CJ?
You're kidding, right? Now. I remember the picture at the Indy 500 of Mario Andretti taking off his rookie stripes, but other than that, no, had no idea.
That's CJ Radoon, and of course he's been with us as well the last few years from rotowire.com, and he covers not only NASCAR but F1. So by the way, when is it just F1 and NASCAR, CJ?
F1, IndyCar, and NASCAR for
okay.
RotoWire. Yep.
And when do those other series begin?
March and April.
Okay, so we should get to spread it out, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
NASCAR is the early adopter.
Yeah. All right. So let's go. And of course, CJ, your main your reports each week focus on what at rotowire.com?
Fantasy. So I have a midweek report up, or I probably shouldn't call it midweek report. It generally comes up after qualifying, which is kind of a DraftKings preview for those players that like to make the daily picks for each of the race and play the DraftKings game. There's a preview for that where I give a couple lineups and some statistics. And then after each race, usually the following Monday or 24 hours after the race is finished, I do a fantasy barometer that shows which drivers are on the upturn and which ones are on the downturn.
All right, let's go ahead and get right to it. And let's start, first of all, I guess I got to ask you guys, Kenny, what is the biggest, what are there, if there are any big changes, either in the playoff system this year, which we had, of course, some major changes last year, or with the car itself that might make the races a little bit more exciting? We know that that's something that NASCAR always strives for, more passing at the front. They're always changing and tweaking the car in the offseason. So anything in layman's terms that has occurred as far as the tweaking with the cars over the last couple of months, and anything with the playoffs?
Well, there really haven't been that from the playoff standpoint. The biggest change there was related to the schedule. You know, they moved some races around, so that's going to be different.
Okay.
Instead of ending the regular season at Richmond like they've done in the past, they're going to end it now at Indianapolis. That'll be the 26th race. The Richmond race moves forward, and it's actually now one of the playoff races. Chicago used to be the first playoff race. That's no longer the case. It's in early July, I believe now. So the scheduling was the big change there. Of course, a lot of talk about the road course at Charlotte for the fall race there, getting another road course, getting a road course into the playoffs, which people have been wanting for a long time.
Okay.
From a car standpoint, really the big changes there, not anything tremendous, but you do have, they did make some changes to the inspection process, tightening up some of the parameters on that. Well, they have a new thing. Basically it's a Hawkeye system that uses, instead of the old LIS system where they pull the car up on a grid and it measured all different sorts of things. They now bring it into a enclosed area, and they have, I forget how many cameras and projectors that take thousands of points on the cars.
Okay.
And make sure that they're all within tolerances. That'll basically tighten it up. I don't know that it'll make it more competitive. It's going to send a lot of guys, looking for ways to gain an advantage that they haven't been able to do before. It's going to make that a little bit harder. And of course, in the Chevrolet camp, they have the new Camaro this year debuting. So that's a big change for them.
CJ, do you think that it's wishful thinking that we're going to see some major changes as far as with the races being more exciting with passing at the front because of anything that's happened over the last couple of months? Or is that just something that you just think may just never happen in this series?
Well, I think the Camaro, as Kenny said, is probably going to bring a little bit more of a balance of competition back. It's going to be interesting to see here at Daytona. It's been pretty even, I would say, in terms of the parity between Toyota, Chevrolet, and Ford. I think there's some thoughts that the new Camaro aerodynamics are much better than the old ones that they had last year. So that's a good thing. We're moving to common splitters, common oil under pan. So there's a little bit of downforce that's taken away from there. But like Kenny said, it's basically static as far as the on-track rules for the cars go. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think it might take a couple of weeks for the Chevrolet teams to really get their aerodynamics figured out. But once they do, we'll see how truly even they are, I guess.
I mean, you cover the other series that have faster cars, a lot more passing situations. So you tell me, CJ, what is it that what are the differences that when race fans go from those different sports and they cover and watch and try to, what is it that you see that separates the sports pro and con because I got to think the pro portion of the Indy cars and so forth. Again, maybe more passing up front, maybe more more speed. You tell me, because I know fans myself that they'll criticize NASCAR. Oh, there's just they're not this, they're not that. What do you think are the major differences, pro or con, from those two series in general?
In terms of competitiveness, you got to put IndyCar up top. So I think they've set tons of records for most lead changes, etc. They've got a ton of passing going on throughout the field. They use a push-to-pass system throughout the race, so you get an extra boost of horsepower that you can use at your disposal throughout the race and maybe make some moves on people. Formula One has a similar kind of system that they have as well with that push-to-pass type of thing, but IndyCar really all uses the same chassis, so everybody's got the same mechanical grip. It's down to the thought process and how you set up your car. When you move to Formula One, you have less passing. You have different cars. Everybody's building their own chassis. So passing takes a hit there because they're a little bit more reliant on the aerodynamics. And then you got NASCAR, which you've got three different manufacturers, a bunch of different engines, or three different engines, I should say. Okay. I think I would put NASCAR in terms of competitiveness and passing actually above Formula One, but without going to a standard car like IndyCar, you're probably not going to get to the level of IndyCar, but I think it all just relies on mechanical grip. So the more mechanical grip you can put in a car, the less aerodynamic grip, I think the better chances you're going to have of passing.
All right. Kenny, what about top team driver changes, crew chief changes? We're not going to go through the entire list, but just give me any that you think are the most important ones that we should be keeping an eye on.
Well, the one that everybody's been talking about for the most part has been at Hendrick Motorsports, where you've had Alex Bowman is stepping into the 88, replacing Dale Earnhardt Jr. William Byron, who won the Xfinity Series championship last year, is taking over basically what would have been the 5-car of Casey Kane, who's moved on, but they've rebranded it. It's actually the 24 that Chase Elliott was in last year. Chase Elliott's still there, but he'll be driving the number 9 and a nod to his father's car number. So you've got Jimmy Johnson, who's won 7 titles there, and then you've got 3 other drivers that are 25 or under. So people are really interested in seeing, how that turns out, because, Hendrick didn't have the type of year last year that everybody expected, and now you've got these young guys coming in. You've got the new car that we mentioned. So there's going to be a lot of attention focused on there. And just the general young versus old drivers, or older drivers, more experienced, I guess, has been a topic. It's a situation where these young guys, the Chase Elliott's, the Ryan Blaney's, the William Byrons, they're going to win races eventually. And when they do win races, that means the older guys aren't going to win races. And how's that going to impact what those guys do? How's it going to, like if Kurt Busch doesn't win a race this year because the young guys are winning them, or Ryan Newman or somebody like that, is that going to hasten, their departure from the series or anything like that? But as far as the driver changes and stuff, the Hendrick things stand out. We mentioned Blaney. He was with Wood Brothers last year. Penske has added a 3rd car to that stable with Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski. Blaney will be driving that. Paul Menard left Richard Childress Racing, which dropped back to 2 teams from 3 to join the Wood Brothers.
Okay.
So you've got some changes like that. Some other, Kane is at the Levine Family Racing now in the 95 car. Bubba Wallace is driving for Richard Petty. Almirola left Petty and is at the 10, where Danica's been for the past 5 years with Stuart Haas. So there's a few changes out there to keep an eye on, but I think the big one is what's going on at Hendrick.
All right. Did he miss anything that you caught, CJ? Anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think he's right. Blaney, I'm really interested to see how Blaney handles moving to Penske. I think that's going to be really good for him. But I think the one thing that Kenny missed that is extremely interesting to me is Eric Jones moving into Joe Gibbs Racing, the partner Denny Hamlin and Kyle Busch. I think that is going to really step up his game. If you remember last year, he was Martin Truex Jr.'s teammate, didn't quite have the success. He was a rookie in the series. We'll move into The ride that Matt Kenseth had last year, I think, is going to be big shoes for him to fill.
Are there any and besides some of the changes that Kenny already mentioned, are there any specific, because coaching changes are huge in a lot of sports, and I've often compared the crew chiefs just like a coach, and I think they should get just as much recognition as coaches do in other sports. So are there any specific crew changes that have taken place, or even some of the ones that Kenny mentioned that you think is the single most important one that we should be keeping an eye on or that you're interested in?
Well, Kurt Busch actually is getting a new crew chief, so Tony Gibson isn't going to be there anymore. He wanted to kind of step away from being at the racetrack every single weekend, so Billy Scott is stepping in, and most of his team is coming with him, the crew, as far as how they worked with Danica Patrick. So it'll be interesting to see how he adapts to that. But outside of that, I think Ty Dillon might be the only other real big name change, and Booty Barker is not going to be his crew chief this year. It's going to be Matt Borland instead, and Borland obviously with Richard Childress Racing in his background.
All right, and as far as that Kyle Busch situation, Kenny, what did you think about that? Do you understand both sides? Do you agree or disagree with what Kyle said? Was it just Kyle being Kyle? What do you think?
You mean from the standpoint of the focus being on the younger drivers?
Correct.
Or are you talking about, yeah, that's, I understand where Kyle's coming from, because, when he came into the sport, there was still a lot of focus on the experienced drivers. And because at that time they were the stars. I mean, that's who the fans were coming to see. And the younger drivers had their share of fans, but they had to build that up. And now with, the last couple of years, look at everybody that's left. Tony Stewart's no longer competing. Jeff Gordon's no longer competing. Dale Earnhardt Jr. is no longer competing. Matt Kenseth's gone. So that star power, it's definitely, dropped a little bit. And NASCAR has made a concerted effort to push the younger guys. And these guys aren't people, they're not guys that most people don't know. I mean, Chase Elliott, everybody has followed his career as he's come up the ladder, and they know his dad won a series championship and was one of the, best racers of his time. Ryan Blaney's father was a tremendous World of Outlaws competitor. So these young guys are known. It's not like, they're people that nobody's ever heard of. So I understand Kyle's concern, but at the same time, if you're in NASCAR's shoes, you're probably going to do the same thing.
Do you agree with that, CJ?
Yeah, I think I agree. It's just kind of an evolution of the sport. We've seen it being moved more toward the younger preference for quite some time now, and it's only going to continue. I mean, it's not like we've got a whole ton of rookies coming in, but I think the ones that are coming in have been racing longer than probably even those that were rookies, 5-10 years ago. I think they're just getting started earlier. They've got full-fledged backing at a much earlier age, and I think they're capable, and therefore they kind of deserve some of the attention as well.
Yeah, and it would be nice, though, if they actually could start winning some races, though. I mean, there's no
Agreed.
question about that.
Completely.
We were talking about it last year about how there was an opportunity for Chase Elliott with a few races to go in the season. And we were figuring it out with Eric that he could actually win the championship with never winning a race. And so as far as those situations potentially coming up again, that could still happen, Kenny, because there haven't been any other changes, right? As far as the point system, could we actually get a scenario like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a situation where you could say that would never happen, but the likelihood of it is probably at an all-time low. There were situations in the past where guys were able to advance through the playoffs in each round without winning a race. Ryan Newman obviously was able to do that and make it to the finals. But, the guy that's won the championship every year since they had this new format has won a final race. It's not been his only win, but you pretty much have to win it to win the championship. It would be extremely difficult for somebody to do that. To be able to just kind of not really point their way in, but but get there without winning races because, most of the guys that got there because they did win races. And they're going to continue to do that. They're not going to, there's a couple that get in because they won one race and that qualified them for it. But for the most part, you have guys that had multiple wins and, they know what it takes to do that, and they're going to continue to win once they get in the playoffs.
All right, so we've got a few other things we want to do, of course, here on this show, and that is we want to obviously go through the championship odds, get both CJ and Kenny's predictions for the final 8 in the playoffs, the final 4, and their championship picks, their championship sleeper picks, and the 500. So we're going to get into all that. And by the way, Eric and I will give our picks, and including our Daytona 500 picks on Sunday's show. So we'll split it up, 2 analysts on this show and then 2 on Sunday's show. And then, of course, we'll make sure to follow them all season long. Now, I do want to ask you guys, I'll start with you, CJ, about your reactions of the Clash race on Sunday, the first opportunity for us to see to see any changes, and especially, okay, it's restrictor plate, so I get that. But still, it seems like once again, and I don't know, I'm finding myself for the past few years screaming at the television for about 15 minutes at the end of these restrictor plate races, wondering why they're not moving out of single file racing until the last lap. And it's driving me crazy. What about you? Because that was the thing that just drove me batty, because it seemed like the single file racing was going on for a half hour and nobody made any moves at all. And that's not entertaining to me.
Yeah, I think Kyle Busch said it best when he said that the race was a little weird in that the action was kind of more toward the beginning of the race versus at the end where it got kind of boring. And it just, for whatever reason, and this is now probably the 3rd, maybe the 4th year that we've seen it now, maybe even longer than that, where once a car gets out front, it's really difficult to pass a car that's out front for whatever reason. Penske had their team all lined up right there, and then it was the 4th person in line that started to make a move that ended up creating the schmozzle, I guess, for lack of a better word, on the last lap, and there was your excitement. I mean, you basically handed it to Keselowski. So I wonder if everybody, just knowing how hard it is, wouldn't pull their moves forward a little bit for whatever reason they do end up getting hung out to dry. They end up having time to be able to work their way back up again. But for whatever reason, everybody's still stuck in this mindset that you've got to make your move on the leader, going into turn 3 or coming off of turn 2, or better yet, even on the tri-oval off of turn 4. And for whatever reason, they're just very nervous about making a move ahead of that. And I'm not exactly sure why.
The reason why this was specifically frustrating, Kenny, was because this race meant nothing. So why didn't cars in 8th and 9th and 10th, couldn't they have figured out a way through their crew chiefs to communicate, to say, let's go? I mean, let's get to the front. Because anybody that's in 10th place in the Clash with a couple of laps to go, if you're back there and you're not moving out, I mean, what are you doing? Besides, I guess, testing the track. I don't know what's going on.
Well, honestly, Greg, I agree with you. I was really disappointed when I watched the race, and I thought, nobody tried to do anything. There wasn't any side by side racing. If you're running 10th or 12th, you're not going to pass anybody if you don't pull out and try.
Yeah.
And if you pull out and try and you fall back, it's not really. It's like you say. It was a non-points race. It's you've got nothing whatsoever to lose, in my mind.
Mm-hmm, sure.
But I was, I went back and watched it again, and then I went back and looked at some highlights because I thought it was just it was just follow the leader. There was nothing going on. There, the first part of the race there actually was a group of cars that break out and try to make moves. And for probably the first 30 laps or so, it was not bad at all. You saw that, but for whatever reason, in those last 40 or so laps, you didn't have that. And then I went back and looked at last year's race because I thought, well, okay, let's compare it to that and see how different that was. And honestly, last year it was Denny Hamlin and Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano. Those 3 guys got out front And the second half of the race, they dominated it. There were no lead changes there. But behind him, everybody was 2 and 3 wide trying to get up there.
Okay.
And to me, it was like, okay, that's a lot more exciting. Even if there aren't any lead changes, these guys are trying to make something happen. And for whatever reason, you only had that at the very end when Austin Dillon dropped out this year. And I think Chase maybe tried to get behind him, and Martin Truex thought, okay, maybe we can get something going here. And unfortunately, they weren't able to. But, you know, that last lap, waiting until that last lap, I don't see the point in it.
Am I missing something as far as the ability, especially when there's enough 20 laps to go, and maybe you're in the 500 and you find yourself in because look, Kyle could say specifically this race, and you look back last year. I mean, this isn't the first time this has happened in these races. This has happened before, and so since it's happened before, and now it just happened on Sunday, isn't there a way to kind of, I don't know whether it's just a something that they all kind of jointly understand, you know, they get into the meeting rooms, maybe is there a way for somebody to stand up in the room and go, hey, you know, if I just want to anybody raise their hands if you want us to communicate with each other if this ever happens again. And, you know, because how else do you do that? How else can you communicate with other drivers during the race when you think you're in one of these little single file runs to try and say, look, if I go out, will you come with me?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know how they, you know, the drivers know, they have a pretty good idea of, you know, who's going to take chances like that. And again, one of the things that, you know, we need to mention is the Clash field. I mean, it was only 17 cars.
True.
So when you get to the Daytona 500, it's going to be totally different. You're going to have guys that are like, you know what, I'm not going to ride back here in 22nd place or 25th place. I'm going to try to get to the front, and you'll have more guys go with them, and it'll be different. Now, you know, I don't expect them to wait till the last lap, you know, to ride around single file until that point. I think you'll have more of it happening throughout the race, but it is still, you know, like CJ said, I think they found out it is really difficult to pass the leader, especially like Brad and Joey and those guys. They are really good at, and Kyle Busch talked about this the other day. He said, you know, when I'm in front and I've got those cars behind me, he goes, all I look in my rearview mirror and see is that car on my bumper. And he goes, that's all I can see. He goes, but Brad and those guys, they kind of see the way the lines are moving and progressing backwards and forwards, and they're able to get in front of those lines and keep them in check and use them to help keep themselves out front. And he said, I just haven't learned what they do as well as they do it yet.
See, I was a little bit, CJ, also, I couldn't figure out why Blaney and Logano couldn't communicate of all drivers. It's like, see, I didn't understand Joey's perspective either. I know he's in third, but it's like, Joey, you're not going to win unless you do work out something with Ryan. And Ryan, maybe he was a little bit impatient there, but the fact is he had been in that spot for whatever, you know, half hour. And I guess maybe he went a little bit early, but still, shouldn't that have been something that at least teammates would have communicated with about?
I was very surprised, just as you. I thought, I mean, it could have very easily been a Penske sweep, but just the moves, the communication between the two. You know, Blaney's new to the organization, so probably.
Yeah, did Joey forget he was his teammate?
Possible. I mean, it's possible, but you know, I think Logano was the one that was in the worst position of the bunch,
sure,
given where he was. So it was his responsibility to defend his teammates. You know, he was probably ended up having to do exactly what he had to do in order to survive. But at the end of the day, 3 out of the top 4 finishers. Being Penske cars, that's a pretty good day for the team.
Yeah, and again, I think the big difference is it's a race that means nothing compared to the 500. I think we can understand a little bit more in the 500 as opposed to which should be, let's just try to win this race no matter what, even if we're teammates. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at. I've got your picks for the final 8 in the playoffs, and I've got let's see, both of you guys have 6 of the same drivers: Kyle Busch, Martin Truex Jr., Brad Keselowski, Kevin Harvick, Denny Hamlin, and Joey Logano. So those 6 you both have in your final 8 in the playoffs. Now, where you both are different, Kenny, you've got Jimmy Johnson and Chase Elliott. So that's in your final 8. And CJ, you have Ryan Blaney and Kyle Larson. So as long as that checks out, hopefully I no errors, right, guys? That's how it works. Okay. So
yeah.
All right. So let's start first of all and talk about Blaney and Larson. CJ, why Blaney and Larson in the final 8 as opposed to Jimmy Johnson and Chase Elliott? Give me that decision between those 4 drivers.
Kenny said it earlier, look at Hendrick and the way that they struggled through 2017. Not that they necessarily struggled, but they didn't have the year that they expected to have. And I think they've got a new chassis coming in, and maybe it's going to help them throughout the year, but I still say it's going to take them a little bit of time to be able to figure out how to get the most out of it. Larson's pretty stable. Blaney coming into Penske, I think he's got a leg up. And remember how strong Penske was at the beginning of the season last year. If he can use that to his advantage, get off to a quick start, I see no reason why those 2 can't be in the final 8.
Same question then, Kenny, the opposite way. You've got Johnson and Elliott, and CJ has Blaney and Larson. Why do you go with the 2 Hendrick drivers over specifically Ryan Blaney and Kyle Larson?
Well, honestly, I like CJ's pick of Larson. That's excuse me. That's a good pick. But when I look at it, typically when there have been changes made, the Hendrick teams have been the quicker teams to adapt to those changes.
Okay.
And while I think it will take them a little while to get the new Camaro to where they want it to be, I still think, one of the big disappointments I think last year, even though Jimmy won 3 times, was, Chad Knaus, crew chief, I think they were frustrated in that they had done pretty much everything they could do to the car they were using last year. They had it for several years. I think it was a new Gen 6 car that they'd been working with. And, Toyota had brought in a new car since then. Ford had changes to its cars since then. And I think they just felt like, they weren't really at their best. And now I think they feel like they have a really good chance and they can work with this car. And like I said, Jimmy won 3 times last year. I don't anticipate him not winning this year. I mean, he's won multiple races every year he's been in the series. They're just, he's not, I think he was a better driver, a few years ago. I think obviously they're not, he's not in his prime now.
Sure.
But he's still one of the best drivers out there. And I think Chase has been so close so often, he's going to win races.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't see that not happening. The Larson thing, those guys had some engine problems at the end of last year that probably they were like, look, we don't have anything to lose at this point. We're trying some stuff, and this is that's pretty much what bit them.
Okay.
Excuse me. And Blaney, I like him, but honestly, I want to say that the last time Penske had 3 cars, and he's had a 3-car team before, they did not run that well. It was difficult for them to do that when they had a 3rd car in the mix, whether it was part-time or full-time. So I would rather kind of take a look and wait and see how they perform.
All right. As far as the fun, guys, both 4 drivers in the final 4 of the playoffs at Homestead, you only have 1 driver each, the same driver, and that's Kyle, who, by the way, this probably makes sense. He is the odds-on favorite to win the championship at 4-1. But the other drivers that you do not have the same, let's see, CJ, you've got Keselowski, Truex, and Larson. And Kenny has Harvick, Hamlin, and Elliott. So let's talk about Keselowski, Truex, CJ, versus Harvick and Hamlin. You've got Keselowski and Truex in the final 4. Kenny has Harvick and Hamlin.
Well, Truex, I think, goes without saying. He's so consistent in terms of gathering stage points throughout the year. I think, again, we may see that in similar fashion. I think some of the other drivers and teams are going to close the gap on what he was able to do early in the season in that respect. But I still think he's among the best at racking up those stage points. So I gave him a little bit of an edge coming through being the defending champion there. Keselowski, I just think with how strong Penske was at the beginning of the year, and Kenny's absolutely 100% spot on when he says that the last time that organization had 3 cars that they struggled. I have a different, I don't know if it's a hope or belief or what, but I just think that with Blaney coming on, I think taking a couple of years off of not having that third car, they were so strong at the beginning of the year. They had an advantage, and then they ended up getting smacked early on, and then they were kind of, floundering for a big portion of the year. I think they learned their lesson. I think they're going to come back strong 2018, and I think Keselowski of the bunch is probably the best driver, which is why I put him through.
And the reason that you wouldn't put Harvick or Hamlin through?
Either one of them very much could. I think if you're going to, it would be hard for Gibbs to get 2 cars in there. Certainly, it'd be a Hamlin or a Kyle Busch being your choice there. I went with Kyle Busch. I think he's right on to be the favorite. I'm not sure that 4-1 is necessarily accurate. And I think Harvick, I've got him going into the final 8 clearly with Ford as well. But, Stewart Haas just doesn't seem to have that edge, or didn't seem to have the edge with the Ford that Penske had early on in 2017. I'm just anticipating that Penske is going to get that advantage back. I don't think that Stewart Haas is going to necessarily be able to close the gap. They just happen to be more consistent throughout 17.
All right, Kenny, you've got Hamlin and Harvick over Keselowski. Well, it's these specific drivers, Harvick and Hamlin over Keselowski and Truex. So why did you like those 2 drivers over the other 2?
Well, I mean, truthfully, I like Harvick and I like Denny just more than anything just because of their consistency.
Okay.
I mean, they don't typically have bad races. They'll have some that aren't great, but they're not like, finishing 40th or something like that. I mean, they're typically pretty steady. And I think Kevin's gotten to the point to where he knows what he needs. He knows what his car needs. He's a smart driver. He's not going to do anything stupid. And I think, last year not winning the championship, he knows there's only so many more opportunities he's going to get to do that. And that team, I don't think they were the same level of Penske, even though, Logano didn't have the year that he wanted. Brad still was pretty solid. But I think the Stewart Haas group, particularly the 4 with Harvick is just, I just look for them to really have a good season, a solid season. And Danny, he's been consistent too. The knock on him is going to continue to be he can't win a championship.
Yep.
Until he wins that.
That's right.
But getting to the championship, he's proven that they're able to do that, and I think they're going to continue to be able to do it.
Yeah, I was bothered last year in the whole Chase Elliott thing. I don't know. I mean, is that in this sport what you would call choking of what Denny Hamlin did? Because it just seemed like, what are you doing? Why are you involving yourself in this stuff? And it, especially in the race following, where it looked like he could have just allowed Chase to just go on his way, let him go. And he didn't. He battled Elliott, knowing that if he did that, Elliott was going to wreck him. Elliott wrecks him, and his championship dreams are over. It's like, is that what happens in that sport when a driver chokes?
I think so. I mean, honestly, in that instance, yeah, I don't think you're wrong there. I think it is a situation where, you know what, you should have used your head. You should have been a lot smarter than that. There's absolutely no reason to get involved in that kind of stuff. It's not going to end well. You're not going to prove any point. It's nothing that's the worst thing that can happen is it's going to take you out of a championship opportunity. So yeah. I just think I don't want to. It is maturity, but it's Denny's been around. He's got the experience. You wouldn't think somebody like that would make those types of decisions.
Yeah. And that's also, I think, that's also where your crew chief has to come in, isn't it? Your crew chief has got to start talking to you and say, "What are you doing? Just get away from him." I don't know what transpired there. I don't know if there was that communication, but that's also part of the job of the crew chief, and whether or not there was something said, or not only those guys know, I guess, unless of course, well, then again, everybody can kind of listen in. So, all right, let's. Oh, by the way, why did you not? I know you had Kozlowski and Truex in your final 8. You didn't move over to the final 4 though, Kenny. So, any particular reason why?
No, I mean, honestly, Truex, I think those guys, I mean, truthfully, if they're as good on the mile-and-a-half tracks this year as they were last year, he's going to be the guy to beat all the way to Homestead. I mean,
Okay.
they are going to be that good. But I really think that, people last year had to look at that team and learn some things. The Joe Gibbs teams, especially because they have the alliance with them and they know what the Furniture Row teams were doing last year. They had to learn some things from that. And, everybody all of a sudden realized, hey, you know what, these stage points and everything, they're really important. We really need to get on those. So I think the approach is going to be different. I would not be surprised to see Martin and that team have another exceptional season. But, I'm thinking there are a lot of people in the garage that were watching what they were doing, and
Okay.
they're gonna, the gap's gonna close, I think.
Yeah, I hope so, because what we don't want to see are 3 versions of the New England Patriots like we saw last year with Truex, Larson, and Kyle. I mean, it was getting crazy every week. So we would like to see a lot more parity than that up front in the standings every week, and we'll see. We'll see how that goes. By the way, the champion, you did go with Harvick. CJ, you went with Kyle. So again, Kyle is the odds-on favorite at 4-1. Why did you go back to Kyle to win another championship?
I'll have you know I did not know the odds before I chose him, but very similar to what Kenny said. I think Joe Gibbs is a team that was closest to what Truex and Furniture Row Racing did all throughout 2017. And if you go to a Larson, Busch, Truex type of triumvirate that we had throughout the entire season last year, I think the one that's going to be most capable of taking advantage of what he learned and really applying it throughout the team is going to be Kyle Busch. I don't think that there were many times throughout the season where he was off step at all with Martin Truex. I think he was just a little bit more inconsistent, maybe had a few more problems early on. But once he got clicking and finally got that win, they all started coming. The floodgates just opened, and I foresee him being able to carry that momentum into 2018.
And by the way, Kevin Harvick is 6-1 to win the championship. That's your pick, Kenny, along with Martin Truex Jr. and Kyle Larson. So no surprise there that Kyle, Truex, and Larson are 3 of the top 4 favorites, along with Harvick at 6-1. So, and you mentioned your reason of why you like Harvick as much as you do. So try to see if Harvick and Kyle can win a second championship, and that's the way that you guys are going to go here. I tell you what, I also, of course, want to get into your sleepers. I'm surprised that you took CJ. I'm surprised you took Blaney as a championship sleeper. I mean, we've talked a lot over the past couple of years about how much we like Blaney. I do think he's going to have a nice season, unless there is one of these 3-car Penske issues that could take place. But if not, I think he's super talented, and I think he's going to have a fantastic year. But winning a championship, wow! By the way, he is 25-1 to win the championship, CJ.
Well, that's the definition of a sleeper, is it not?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think he finally got the wins last year that were coming to him. I think he's shown a lot of maturity. I think Penske will bring that out even more with him, and I'm really banking on Ford and Penske being able to continue their very strong relationship and really having an edge over the rest of the teams throughout 2018. And stranger things have happened when you're in a winner-take-all kind of finale. If he gets there into the Final Four, and looking at, the bunch outside the obvious ones, he would probably be the one that I would put in the Final Four outside of those ones that are all, single-digit odds.
Sure.
Anything can happen, and with a smart crew chief and a smart team backing him up like Penske, I think a lot of things are further out of the realm of possibility than him taking the championship.
And Kenny, you doubled the odds by going with Alex Bowman at 50-1. Wow, championship sleeper Alex Bowman. And look, I guess you were really impressed with what you saw from Alex Bowman a couple years ago when he filled in for Dale Jr. and he's already looked pretty good this week.
Yeah, he has, and honestly, you're right. When he filled in for Dale Earnhardt Jr. at 2 years ago, he didn't let the pressure get to him. He knew, what they wanted him to do when he went out and did that. He exceeded a lot of it. People think, that was really his first time in Cup, and it's not. He drove, he had season under his belt before with BK Racing, so he has the experience. And then he comes down here and he wins the pole, which he admits. He said, that's not about the driver. That's all about the team and the car. But, honestly, I just think if he can get there, I mean, Greg Ives is a really good crew chief, really talented crew chief. And if they cannot, if they can avoid some landmines out there and have a strong start to the season, I think they can do well. I really do. Now, there are a lot of teams out there that are more experienced. There are drivers that, are better, quite honestly, than him at this point. But he's going to learn and he's going to be able to adapt pretty quick. And I think he's already shown that.
All right, let's now move on to and I am going to get just quick observations from you guys in a couple minutes on the 500 before we close the show. But we've talked about this before, and of course, with the Winston many years ago, the NASCAR did have something similar to this, which is what you see in tennis, what you see in golf. They have the majors, they have the slams. So hopefully NASCAR will figure out a way to come up with another system like this. So we'll call them our prime racetracks. Why not here on Prime Sports Network? So our 4 prime tracks, which we would consider if there was something like a Grand Slam or majors of NASCAR, which tracks do you think should hold those events or that prestige? We'll start with you, CJ. And by the way, both of you guys had Daytona. That's the only track that both of you guys had, which I'm kind of surprised, but it is. So that's good. That gives us 6 tracks, 6 different tracks. CJ, you had Charlotte, Watkins Glen, and Bristol. And Kenny had Talladega, Martinsville, and Darlington. So why did you go with Charlotte, Watkins Glen, and Bristol?
So I'm envious that Kenny found a way to get Darlington in there. I really wanted Darlington in there, but I went with diversity. So with Daytona, you got a super speedway restrictor plate race. Charlotte, you got the cookie cutter 1.5 mile fast oval that makes up the majority of the schedule. Watkins Glen, you got your road course, and I think it's probably the prettiest road course of the bunch that's out there at the moment. We've only got 3. And then Bristol, you got to have a short track, and I just find Bristol more exciting than Richmond and Martinsville.
All right, and you, Kenny, you've got those again. There's 3. Those tracks. You've got two restrictor plate tracks. That surprised me.
Yeah, and part of that is, when I look back, I mean, I can remember when there was something called the Triple Crown.
Yep.
In NASCAR, and it was the Daytona 500. It was the summer July race at Talladega, and then it was a Southern 500 at Darlington, and it was a big deal for a driver to win those 3 races, during the same season. It wasn't done very often. I just, for me, I mean, those always were big races, and it's kind of hard for me to say, well, okay, I definitely, the Daytona 500, there's no way you're not going to put that in there. But Talladega just kind of holds a special place because of the history and what it's meant. So I felt like, okay, yeah, it deserves it. My other one is Martinsville and Darlington. Honestly, I thought about Indy just because of the history there. I think there's a lot to be said for that. I know a lot of people say they're racing awful there. It's not that good. There's not that much that goes on. But just the history that surrounds that place, I've always enjoyed going there. And the racing, it is what it is. It's not going to be, door to door for 500 miles every weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always liked that. But Martinsville to me stood out instead. I ended up going back and putting Martinsville instead of Indy, mainly because, I've had so many drivers tell me, they talk about Martinsville and they say, you know what? They say, you look at that track and you think that ought to be the easiest track in the world to drive because it's not banked. It's only a half mile. And they say it's actually technically one of the most difficult tracks they have to race on. And, Kyle Busch, it took him forever to figure it out. Several other drivers, are still trying to figure it out. And Carl Edwards, I don't think he ever really got a good handle on that track. And, look at the success he had everywhere else.
Okay.
And plus, it's been around forever. It is the only track that's still on the circuit that was on it the first year. So to me, that's a major there. And then, Darlington, it's another one. It was the first super speedway for NASCAR. It's a very unique track. It's not one where I've got to beat the other 39 guys. It's more of I've got to survive this track. And if I can survive this track, then I'm going to have a good finish.
All right. Before I let you go, CJ, Daytona, do you know who you like right now to win the race, or do you need to see what goes on today?
Based on the boringness of the Clash, I really need to see what's going on today. You get nothing from the single car qualifying. You might as well throw it out the window. It's basically qualifying for the duels. We'll see how the racing goes today. They've been pretty split if you look at the practice times. If you look at the qualifying times, Toyota, Chevrolet, Ford, they're all up there. So I want to be able to see through tonight's races who's able to make the moves, who's able to stay out front. If a Penske car is out front throughout their duel, they're probably going to end up being my favorite for the race, though.
All right. And any particular sleepers right now that you're thinking about?
It's a good question.
Besides Ryan Blaney, who, by the way, is 25-1 to win the race.
I wouldn't put him as a sleeper, to be honest with you. I don't think he's necessarily going to come out and win either. Maybe somebody like maybe a Jamie McMurray or somebody like that. I don't know if you'd necessarily count him as a sleeper.
He is.
But I think somebody like that could come out and surprise, and him in particular. He's so good on restrictor plate races, and he drafts really well. If he can get his nose clean, keep his nose clean, stay out of trouble, I think he might have a chance coming home.
All right, CJ, appreciate your time. We'll be talking to you all throughout the season. And, of course, we'll also have your reports posted at primesportsnetwork.com every week, including race recaps and previews. So thanks for joining us here in the middle of the day, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Thanks, CJ. All right, that's CJ Radoon. And, again, at rotowire.com, you can check out what he has for you. And, as I mentioned, he'll be posting some articles here on the website a couple times a week, and we'll be posting them and letting you know when they're available. CJ can be reached on Twitter at CJ Radoon. Let's get your date. Now, you've got your picks already, Kenny. So, of course, you could change your mind since, again, there's some action to go before then. But how confident? I mean, you did pick Kevin Harvick to win the championship. So, is he going to be one of those rare Daytona 500 winners that win a championship?
Well, I think he definitely could be. That's something that's, you don't see that happen a lot. A guy wins a 500 and then ends up winning the championship because it's a restrictor plate race here, and it's they only go to them a couple of times here in Talladega, so it's not that it's not like, oh, if you got a great plate program you're going to win the championship. But like I said, I mean, Kevin's been. I think he's just so much more mature now, so much smarter. He's got those guys we're talking about, the Penske guys, Brad and Joey and them, and how strong they've been. But Harvick and those guys, they're in Fords too. They've got the same engines, from Roush Yates. So they're not lacking on power. I think he's gonna, he'll drive a smart race. He said the other day in the Clash, that he made some mistakes, that the car was fine. The car drove really good, but that he made some mistakes out there. And he was I got the impression that he was just kind of feeling his way around to see what the car would do, to see what the draft was going to be like with, the no ride height rules and things that they've changed for here. And he's won it before. So
Sure.
it's not like he's got that pressure on him to, I need this on my resume. I need a Daytona 500 win. He's got that. So I think he's more comfortable and has a little less pressure on him maybe going into the race.
Well, you always get good odds at the restrictor plate tracks, and even though there's usually one driver that the odds are, and it used to be Dale Earnhardt, and sometimes you would also see Brett Keselowski there, especially at Talladega. But after the way Keselowski looked at the Clash, he's the favorite now, the clear favorite, by the way, at 7-1. Everybody else is 10-1, 12-1 or higher. Hamlin's the second choice. That's not a surprise. And then you have Harvick, by the way, is one of those 12-1 drivers. Your sleeper pick surprised me a little bit. I know Paul Menard has had some success in this race, these tracks before. He's a 66-1 shot. Why do you like him as a sleeper pick?
Well, honestly, that's more a nod, I think, to the team that he's driving for.
Okay.
Wood Brothers Racing. They put so much effort into this race, and I don't want to say other teams don't either, but it's always, they've been coming here forever. Glenn Wood, who founded the team, raced on the beach down here. It just means a lot to them.
Okay.
So they put that extra effort into it, and I think Paul's a smart driver. He's not. You don't get out here and run in these races if you don't have a certain amount of talent, and I think he does. And I think him going to the Wood Brothers, he's going to bring a little something to them. I do think they lost a little something, when Blaney went to Penske, but I don't think it's going to be a big deal. I mean, I think Paul is going to fit in well with those guys. He's like I say, he's won before, but I think if you're going to go with a long shot, go with somebody that really, puts the extra effort into it and is, they've won it before, obviously.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to see how they do.
Well, I mean, the theory behind your analysis does make sense. And if you're looking for sleepers in this race, which they're going to be there, I mean, look what happened with all the wrecks last year. And look, the wrecks can be fun as long, obviously, and what's great is the safety has just come along so well over the years that when you have wrecks, you feel pretty good that everybody's going to be okay. And there were a lot of wrecks last year, and that's really, look, let's just be honest, that's what fans kind of want to see. Sometimes there can be so many wrecks, though, that it does get kind of ridiculous. Like last year, I forget how many drivers were there still on the track at the end of the race, like 12, something like that?
Yeah, not a whole lot, that's for sure.
That was crazy. So anything can happen, and that's why we do get long shots. And if you're going to pick long shots in the NASCAR series, the Monster Energy Series, this is definitely the type of race that you want to go ahead and do that. By the way, Matt Kenseth, is he done, or is he kind of just still waiting to see if he gets a phone call?
Well, truthfully, I think he's done. I mean, I don't think he's not going to be one of these guys that's like, an owner's going to call him up and go, hey, we want to field a third car for the Daytona 500. Would you be interested in running that race?
Okay.
That race only. That's not something that he's interested in. I think if it was a full-time ride and it was a competitive ride, he would be interested, obviously. But that hasn't materialized. So, he's enjoying his retirement, I guess you could say. No different than Greg Biffle. Last year was out of a ride, and people thought, well, okay, if something opens up, he'll come back.
Yeah.
And he probably had opportunities to step into some cars, but they weren't what he didn't feel like they were competitive, and he chose not to do that.
What is Greg Biffle doing these days?
To be honest with you, he's not racing.
Yeah. I guess when you don't race and you don't get into broadcasting, then sometimes guys just, they're okay with that. They want to go ahead and do other things. They've got other things, families, and that can keep them busy. So what about Danica Patrick? She's going to race here. This is her last race, right?
Excuse me. Yeah, this is her last Cup race. Her
last Cup
5-year
race.
run at Stuart Haas ended, and she's got one race start here with Premium Motorsports. Her original crew chief, Tony Uri Jr., is back with her. GoDaddy, her sponsor's back. So she's going to make her one final attempt here. And, it's a smart move. She runs well on restrictor plate tracks. So, I would be more surprised if she didn't have a decent finish than if she had a good one. I think she can, she's run well here before.
Yep.
And if she stays out of trouble, I think she can get a decent finish. And then she's got one more Indy 500 start later this year, and then that'll be it for her for behind the wheel.
What do we look forward to tonight with the duels? Now, the winner of the duels will be on the pole on the front row. Is that how it works?
No,
No?
The qualifying from Sunday, Alex Bowman's on the pole for the Daytona 500. Denny Hamlin will be on the front row with him, and
Okay.
tonight they will start on the pole in their respective duels. But the other positions behind them will be determined. And there's only 40 cars here, 40 spots available, so everybody gets in.
Oh, okay.
Nobody has to worry about, I've got to finish 15th or whatever to advance. That's not going to be an issue.
Okay. So
but as far as what we expect, honestly, I think a lot of guys will spend most of the night trying to figure out their cars, making sure that everything's running okay, what they're going to do in traffic. But it is run at night, unlike the 500 on Sunday, so it's going to be a limited amount of stuff they can run.
how many laps per duel?
60 laps, 160
60
miles, I believe. Yep.
Okay. By the way, Alex Bowman is 15-1 in his one duel, so it may not be a bad. I guess he has a better chance with a limited amount of drivers. He's in the Keselowski-Logano section though, so that might be pretty tough. And Hamlin and Kyle are the favorites in the other duel number 2, and that's the one that goes off. I think what do they start? 7:00 tonight? Is that when it starts?
Yeah, it'll be a little bit. It'll be like 7:15, 7:20 before they actually take the green, probably, and the other one will be a little bit after 9.
All right, Kenny, I appreciate it. We look forward to talking to you again throughout the season. And anything in particular that you're working on right now? I think you mentioned one of the things that you were working on earlier on the show. Anything else that you got planned either this week before the 500 or in the coming weeks that we can find on kennybruce.net?
Well, probably one of the other things, there's been a little bit of talk, actually a lot of talk about the information that teams have been gathering off the broadcast, showing, the brake traces and different things like that, that you've always been able to follow it and see different things that other teams were doing, but it was kind of generic. It wasn't really accurate. Well, now I think the NASCAR is going to make that information available to all the teams. Some of the drivers aren't pleased about that. Some of them think it's a really good move. NASCAR says, okay, we want to put this stuff out there because fans want this information, but the drivers that don't like it are saying, I don't want people knowing what I'm doing. So it's been a topic. I've got a couple people we talked to the other day about it. I'm going to talk to some of the manufacturers and see what their take is on it and see what's there.
All right. Well, enjoy the duels tonight. Enjoy, of course, the other race activity this weekend and the 500 on Sunday, Kenny. And we will talk to you again real soon.
Sounds great, Greg. I appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks, Kenny. All right. That's Kenny Bruce. And again, we also want to thank CJ Radoon. By the way, as I mentioned at the start of the show, Eric Smith from RaceReviewOnline.com is going to join me on Sunday. We don't have a time yet, but he will be at the track live. So we'll talk to Eric. We've got a few other topics we did not discuss today that we'll discuss with Eric, including some fantasy analysis. But we'll also give our picks for the playoffs and the championship and the sleepers and the 500. That is going to be coming up on Sunday's edition of Prime Sports NASCAR here on the Prime Sports Radio Network. Follow us on Twitter at PrimeSN. By the way, you could also follow Kenny on Twitter at Kenny Bruce. So that is going to do it for our 2018 NASCAR season preview edition of Prime Sports NASCAR. We'll see you again on Sunday. Enjoy the races, everybody.